Yeah. So what we wanted to discuss today is the topic of psychological freedom. As I say, this is one of my personally, I am into this course, etc. So one of the main things that I think about is this topic, and for me, it all converges. And because we had a lot of these sessions across the period now, across the months, I thought maybe as a group, it would be nice to converge on this topic now. Yeah. So let's, as always, let's see very pragmatically first what all scientists have done, etc. So, I mean, this is just one of my favorite guys. Yeah, this guy, his thought process influences me a lot. I mean, he's one of the guys who has also been addressed by Eckhart Tolle a lot. Yeah, so there is a lot of common things that these guys think about. But I just wanted to pick his definition. He says that I don't mind what happens. Yeah, and that is the essence of inner peace for me. Yeah, that is what he always tells. And but there is a lot of things behind it. Yeah, but just to start with that as a thought, and now let's look at first a lot of psychological work that we have. As always, let's look at the perspective. I'm still trying to fit this screen somewhere. Yeah, I don't know, down here. Let's see. So psychologists across the years have been working on this topic. Yeah, let's start with William James. So the three key themes that James started working on is related to the attention. So he says there has to be attention in understanding things before we try for psychological freedom. Then he talks about determinism. So how is it all determined? And then he goes towards spirituality a little bit. I mean, the definition of spirituality is again very personal, but I think what William James at that time was trying to do is what Maslow is trying to tell in terms of finding a final purpose and living a life of purpose with full passion. Yeah, actualization, for example. This is what William James was saying. Then we have Sigmund Freud, the famous guy, a lot of influence and a lot of psychology streams. So he was a hard determinist. So for him, in his view, free will is an illusion. He completes it at that. He says that there is always a lot of unconscious process. I think we had discussed sometime back the id, ego, superego concept. He says there is a lot of biology, a lot of conditioning, all of the nature, nurture put together. There is always something where you react based on the stimulus, based on these things, and free will to react or do anything is really an illusion. It doesn't exist. Yeah, he just signs it off. He says no. Then comes his colleague, his friend, Carl Jung, and he says he believes in free will. And he sees that the hard determinism is merely one of the modes of thought. Means it happens with a lot of people, but it's just one of the modes in which the thought works, which means there is a way to break it. This is what Carl Jung says. Self-reflection is a lot of thing that this Carl used to do. Which again, Freud, his colleague, was vigorously avoid. He says, no, it doesn't work that way. It is always based on very behavioristic model that we have in us. Yeah, there is nothing called self-reflection. There is nothing called free will. There is no freedom from it. Then comes Burrhus and Skinner. So Skinner, he sees, again, he also sees free will and emotions and motivation all as illusionary covers, all of them put together as illusionary covers. Yeah, he signs it all off. And he says this are all covers for the real causes for human behavior, the effect of environment and conditioning on our biology. Yeah, very, very similar to what Freud is trying to tell. He goes so much so that, and he has done experiments around it, arguably complete or not, but he says he goes on to writing that we can train human beings like animals to think and do whatever we want them to do. Yeah, so he would go to an extent of that. Yeah, he's saying, give me a human being and I can train to make him think and do whatever I want him to think and do. Yeah, so he was from that perspective. Viktor, this guy now is an interesting turn of events for me, because so far are all psychologists, and this guy comes with a personal experience. Yeah, he comes with an experience of being in a Nazi concentration camp. Now think of it, it's like a rock bottom of where one can find a psychological affinity. Yeah, so what he says, he talks about a lot of things of finding inner freedom and internalizing thing to find freedom, etc. And when he was asked, what do you think about Skinner's statement? Yeah, so what he says is that man does not cease to be an animal. Yeah, he agrees to that. Yeah, but at the same time, he says that a man is an infinitely more than an animal. So everything that can be taken away from men, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in a given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way, cannot be taken away. Yeah. So predominantly, even though we are animal, but we are much, much more than that. And that freedom, internal freedom, cannot be taken away. Now, that's his personal experience speaking. Yeah. It's not just something he was trying to study or prove like others, but that's his own personal experience. This is what he felt as a freedom. Yeah. So
he also mentioned from his experience in the concentration camps that the one thing they could never take away from a human being was precisely all the inner part, their mind and their spirit.
Yes.
Skinner was very much saw us like animals and was focused strictly on behaviors, stimulus, reaction. Freud had added the mind and the unconscious processes. But Frankl adds also a spiritual dimension.
Yes. Yes.
Which was where he founded his logotherapy.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of self experience, a lot of internalization of things. Yeah. A lot of concepts of finding it internally, even when things are as bad as they are in the concentration camp. Yeah. So I love reading a lot about him. So thank you, Alexandra, for pitching on that.
You're welcome.
One of the statement on psychological freedom, and we'll touch upon that soon, is the essential factor is observing self. Yeah, the consciousness, which is doing the watching. And what one place it was written, and it's on the welldoing.org, the source, just to call them out. If we ignore the observing self, as psychology has largely done until recently, then we may be looking at the mind from a wrong perspective, right? Like trying to understand it by thinking about it rather than observing it. Yeah, so it's not really, so what Freud and others, I think, I'm not an expert into this topic, but what I think is they were really thinking about the mind and its functionality. Frankl, on the other hand, because of his situation and whatever happened, he was in the observing side of the mind. Yeah, so we need to really observe the self and not really only think about it. There is a huge difference. Yeah. I mean, I remember one of these times, I mean, I think it was 2 years back. I was thinking a lot about thinking. I think I told this in one of the last sessions or somewhere, but so I was so much so that I was even losing sleep over it, right? Why do I think this? Where is this thought coming from? When is it starting? And I'm trying to pay a lot of attention. And in one of the office setups, I think Piyush knows him. There is a friend of ours, common friend of ours called Naman. He's not too deep into, he doesn't care about this kind of topics too much, but he was hearing me listen. And he just gave a very casual feedback, which he himself forgot. And he said, "Oh, so you were thinking about thinking." And I said, and that's the difference. That I understood in a very pragmatic sense, that I was thinking, I was not really observing it. And that was a very big difference, yeah, between thinking about thinking and really observing yourself. Yeah. So that's, but okay. So let's
I also have one point to add is the respect to, if you go to the previous slide,
yes.
The difference between what with Viktor Frankl and Skinner were, their ideologies were. If you also consider it, that psychological freedom is a freedom of the collective, or what do you say? I'm not getting the word. A result of the collective rather than an individual, right?
The collective consciousness is where you're going.
Yes. The reason I'm saying that is, for example, like where Skinner says that all human beings are animals and we can basically train them. That did happen for centuries in India when it was under the British rule.
Sure.
We literally were trained, and we learned to do all the actions that our trainers, so to speak, told us to do.
Yes.
But the collective could not be trained. The generational collective could not be trained. After a certain point of time, the factor that Frankl talks about, where a human being is infinitely more than an animal, that came out. The inherent, this one of the collective came out, and they said, okay, we are going to retaliate against this now, and we're not going to be trained animals. And that's where the revolution came forward. So I believe it's an action of the collective too.
Absolutely. And we don't need to look at such extreme examples. Just for example, the Fair and Lovely drive coming to an end now. Yeah, it's a collective. I think that was equally like training in a softer way through advertising in India. Last time KL brought that up. So that entire thing as a collective, as you say, it couldn't sustain that human behavior of freedom, of understanding and revolting against that animal instincts of being tempted towards something which does not make too much sense was gone. Yeah, so the example could be something as simple as that as well. Okay, thank you. So let's see a few more cases. So then Martin. So Martin was talking about positive psychology as a part of deterministic in happiness. Yeah, this is what Martin tries to talk about, and what he's now trying to bring is a little more philosophical aspect of eudaimonic. What he means by that is that there has to be a meaning to happiness, and people who go towards these kind of disposition are far happier and resilient to stress and disappointment. Yeah, so he's now trying and define a little bit and bring meaning into a happiness concept, and then that builds into the psychological freedom. Again, whatever that psychological freedom is, we'll try to touch upon that. Yeah. Jon, I think Jon is not a psychologist, he's a microbiologist, but he started this concept of mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral therapy. So he started a lot into mindfulness, and what he brings, and it was a very scientifically done approach, yeah, where there have been people with physical pain, wartime traumas, and a lot of it, and then they were collectively brought in doing CBT, but also with mindfulness. And then the readings were taken, the scientific measurements were done on their which neural cycles are now active, how are their hormones, how are their happiness chemicals, whatever those things are. Yeah? How is their blood pressure, how is their sugar levels, etc. So and it was scientifically confirmed in many studies that this works. So liberation from suffering and distress therefore lies, what he says, in the ability to rest in simple, very, very key for me at least, non-judgmental and compassionate awareness, and not to be so moved by the transient mental or sensory experiences. Yeah. So for example, imposter syndrome like situation which are transient mental and sensory experiences, not to be moved by that. I mean, easier said than done, philosophical, and this is where I want to dig into as a group today, hopefully. Yeah. I mean, it's easier said. I mean, we can always say non-judgmental. Can we be non-judgmental? Are we being non-judgmental now as when we speak? Yeah, or when we hear things. Maslow. So the famous pyramid of actualization. So Maslow, what he really says is, and if you go into details of it, I mean, Maslow from childhood, when I have been hearing about Maslow, it was always about, okay, meeting the physical needs, safety, blah, 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 and then going towards the purpose or actualization, the peak of the pyramid of Maslow. But what Maslow actually tried to say is that actualization, that tip of the pyramid, is almost as equivalent as the foundation. He didn't say that. He said to reach there or sustain that, you need the foundation, but he didn't say, okay, you do. He says both of them. So the real bottom foundation and actualization, the purpose, is equally important. One very nice thing Maslow brings in, and that is where he tries to marry, I think, the East and the West philosophies or spiritual, so-called, whatever that means for each one of us, and scientific pragmatic approaches. He says that the peak of the pyramid, the actualization, is both the beginning and the end. And from terms of his defined pyramid, but he says if you are at that state, newer states of minds open up now, and that he could not define. Yeah, he said, okay, that is something that you need to find after that. One other very important difference on Maslow's approach versus the Freud's of the world, etc., was that what Maslow said is, I don't want to look at the rock bottom of human psychology. Yeah, I don't want to catch up people who are distressed. I don't want to talk to people who were in concentration camps, who have suffered, etc. But I'm going to talk to the best of the humanity. I'm going to talk like people like Einstein's of the world, etc. Right? So he said, I want to look at the best of humanity. I want to see how they are. And that is where his entire entire approach of this pyramid, etc., comes up. But one thing very important to note over here is that he confirmed and he re-stressed on the topic that none of the human beings are complete. There is no perfect human being. Everybody is flawed. Even the best human beings in the world that he met from his era, he said, everyone is flawed. Yeah. The difference is how they look at their flawness, etc. But the crux of the problem is that there cannot be a human being who is not flawed. Yeah. So I mean, I might be sorry, I've been using the wrong word. I didn't mean fraud. I mean flawed. Yeah. So every human being is flawed. Yeah. I mean, my flaws can be different than your flaws, but everybody is flawed. Nobody is a perfect human being. That is what Maslow also tried to bring up. Okay. So then, what we understand from all of these things, and let me stop sharing for some time. And I want to ask the group, I mean, looking at all of these psychological history and backlogs, what do you think is the core of not having a psychological freedom? Or even if you want to define what psychological freedom is to set the context first, let's even do that. I'm fine with that. But why do you think, what's in the core of not having a psychological freedom? Yeah. What stops us from being psychologically free? Yes, doctor.
I believe the fundamental thing that stops, according to my opinion, is the lack of awareness that I can have psychological freedom. My culture, my upbringing, my generational history, the society I live in, nowhere in any of this have I been told that you are free to have psychological freedom. Everything has been dictated to me. Everything, I mean, things have been told to me what I should believe, should not believe. The more I've read, the more I have experienced other people's point of view, the more I have expanded my mind in terms of this, I can get an inkling, I can just say a pinch of the possibility of a psychological freedom, which still I think is so ingrained in me about not having it, that to train myself to have it, or even think beyond that, the Stephen King's The Dome, think because that there is a life beyond that, there is something beyond that, is a tasking thing. It's something that I cannot comprehend completely. So having been in that phase or that point of this thing, it's very difficult for me to say that, to define what is psychological freedom for me. I can just listen to all of you and say, okay, this is her point of view, or this is his point of view, but what is it for me? It's very difficult for me to define in crisp, clear words.
Yeah. I mean, one thing very important that you said is one thing is learn. I don't know that I can have a psychological freedom, as in really know that I can have a psychological freedom, and that's one of the blockers. Yeah. But how do we work around it? Can one know? How can one know that one can have a psychological freedom?
Jamin, hi, KL here. Just a couple of things, if I can just, talk about before coming on to how do we know we have psychological freedom. If you reflect back on Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And I've studied this, even earlier, during my college and all of that. And this Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs truly baffles me, because if you look at it, in terms of those steps in the pyramid, you start with your physiological needs, and then you go to safety needs, then you go to love and affection, and then esteem needs, and then self-actualization. If you look at even in a chronology or a sequence of a human being, right? First, he wants food. He wants food, or he wants basically all of that to be taken care of. Then he wants a roof over his head, and then he wants to get married, and then probably after all that is done, now he wants to move, let's say, in the best of cars, maybe a Rolls Royce or a Phantom or whatever. And then at the end of it, he wants to, in the form of charity, like the Azim Premjis of the world or the Warren Buffetts, give back to society, right? Now, where I'm trying to come to is, this is something which is more out of a choice. So where probably, and I don't know if I'm competent enough to call the flaw in Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is one, I've seen people just stuck with, let us say, safety needs. And I've talked about this earlier as well, where people could actually buy one house and then go buy a second house, buy a third commercial property. So they're not actually growing up the ladder. That is one very important thing. Okay. Or if somebody is just stuck with, let us say, a physiological need, they can just stay stuck there. Okay. Like a happiness coach, he doesn't care for anything else in the world. He doesn't progress through the ladder. Okay. The other example, and so the other example also is, I was reading the other day, there was a Jain Muni or a guy being initiated into as a Muni or as a Sadhu, as we would call it for Pilar and Alessandra. And he must have been all of 14 years of age. Now, what has this guy gone through the various steps in the hierarchy of Abraham Maslow to go and actually sit upon that summit of self-actualization? Nothing, right? So he's going directly to a self-actualization. Or if I were to be told my son will want to actually buy himself an apartment and then get married, I would call him a fool, because this is all something which is already available. He needs to develop or build upon what's already there, right? And not really progress through this whole cycle. So there are certain things that, appears to be something which I don't go by. Maybe it's in a very idealistic situation. And coming back to the question of psychological freedom, so if somebody, let's say, I'm at a point, or let's take the example of Azim Premji, right? Now, he's in a point where he's in a self-actualization mode where he's giving back to society. Now, and sorry for picking up that name, but just for an example, but if Rishad Premji, if I were to think that he's going to go through these various steps in the hierarchy as per Abraham Maslow, the answer is no. He might already be at a self-esteem need stage, or he might be in a self-actualization himself, which means he has given himself that psychological freedom because of the cushion that's available in the form of his dad or his family, right? So that's where I always felt that, beyond a point, the psychological freedom or even Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, doesn't serve a purpose, I mean, it's not something that can be applied straight to every one particular individual, right?
Yeah. So my point is the following. Yes. It's a whole different discussion of the Maslow's pyramid, and everybody could look at it from a different perspective. I mean, you never know. A son of a billionaire, might not even have the foundation layer done for him. We might see it like that. They might not. Yeah. So it's a real perspective game. But I'm not coming. What I'm trying to come up with a question is, even self-actualization. I mean, you might look at Asim Premji at self-actualization. He might not look at himself there. Yeah. And even if he might look at himself there, the question really is, and that comes down to the discussion of today. Do you think a person like Bill Gates, do you think they are psychologically free? Do they have complete psychological freedom? What is psychological freedom? Yeah, let me ask you this. How much do you think, KL, how much do you think you are how much psychological freedom do you have?
I have total psychological freedom, and it's not out of arrogance, because if I could kick up a job that was paying me 3 to 4 lakhs in the corporate world to pursue what I like, I call that as psychological freedom, right? Ability not to be tied down to a job or a corporate role with something, according to me, was not probably the need of the hour. So if there is one accountant short, the world's not going to come into a crisis mode, right?
Yes.
But
yes.
one additional psychologist can do a whole lot of well-being for the society,
yes.
Create a lot more healthy and mentally fit workers, right?
Yes.
Because I've been through this whole, roller coaster.
Yes.
So to me, according to me, that is psychological freedom.
Yes, it's one part of psychological. Now let me ask you this, right? And that's now we are coming to a definition of what psychological freedom is. A psychological freedom, for when I say that you are here and you are free, means between stimulus and response, some of the examples I'm trying to give you, between stimulus and response, you are completely in your state of awareness.
Yes.
And if somebody really comes and tells you wrong, even in your family, before even reacting, before feeling bad, before being angry, you are now in a position to make a choice whether you want to respond that way or not. That is one of the ways, yeah. That's one of the aspects of psychological freedom. The second aspect of psychological freedom is I am here and now, which means I am not, I don't have the baggage, good, bad, reasoned, unreasoned baggage from the past, but I do not even have the baggage, good, bad, ugly, planned, purposeful, unpurposeful for future. I am here. And when I say I'm here, I'm listening to the word here as if that's the most important part of my life.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to the context of complete psychological freedom, because a and that coming back to the topic of Maslow's, of course, if somebody has the food on the table, fair enough health, they might claim, I am not worried too much about my money. Oh, but somebody else maybe.
Sharing a lot of history.
Yeah, there is a lot of background noise. Yeah. Okay. So, okay, psychological freedom. So that is what psychological freedom for us is. Between stimulus and response, are you completely aware? Are you completely free from mentally, psychologically free from my future and past and in here now? Yeah, that's psychological freedom that we are talking about. I'm sorry, I missed the thought of what I was trying to tell after that. What was I telling after that?
So I think you were alluding to what constitutes or makes up psychological freedom, and we were talking about,
the definition of psychological freedom.
Yeah, and being in the present, versus
being completely in the present, giving completely this moment, this word, your complete presence. Yeah. So I think here there is a lot of background noise from your side, I think. Yeah. So this is the context of the entire psychological freedom. Yeah. So now for example, if somebody just in this call, maybe there is some other person just said, Jamin, you are stupid, you don't know anything. Yeah. I might act very calm and tell, yeah, maybe I am, I need to look at it, but internally, what the hell? Yeah. That's not psychological freedom. That's a response to a stimulus. I was not aware in between. And yeah, I was talking about Maslow's thing. I mean, it's once the foundation layers are strong, you may or may not want to agree. But once your foundation layers are strong, you can sit back and say, yeah, I don't worry too much about the health. I don't worry too much about money. It's easy to stay. I don't worry too much about love. Man, you have a family. I mean, I have a family. I can talk about that kind of thing. But that's not psychological freedom. And if that is psychological freedom, for me, that is never ending, because you will always have a current state that from which you want to go to the next stage. So you can only look at a freedom on the below stages and not on the future stage. That's like you are a victim of now next something like an anxiety and not depression, maybe something like that. Yeah. So it's and that comes to my point of defining the psychological freedom. Yeah, from my side, a psychological freedom is you are in complete control of your responses. Maybe, I'm not sure. Yeah. You are in complete from a continuity of time perspective, the past and the future, you are able to give your now full thing. Yeah, that's psychological freedom. But there is another aspect that I feel about psychology is I can allow myself not to be free, not to be in control. I can allow myself to be angry, and it's okay. I can see myself being angry, and I'm fine. Yeah. So this is more or less the definition of psychological freedom that I personally look at, and this is the discussion that I wanted to have. But anybody first, before we go into the next, because the topic that we started was what really stops us from psychological freedom. Yeah. And doctor said, even having a idea of that I can be psychologically free, I just didn't know it, that there is a concept like that. How can I be free? That was one very, very, very strong angle to it. But yeah, anybody else from your definition of psychological freedom and why we are not free from it? Why can't we be free from it? Or what is the hurdles? Yeah. Piyush, Pilar, Alessandra, you want to pitch in anything?
Yes, I will want to add something here.
Yes.
So as you said, I mean, before this session, I didn't even know something like psychological freedom exists.
Yeah.
But now I'm thinking about it. So there is something that helped me. I mean, I won't say I'm psychologically free today. I do have emotions and something. Sometimes they get uncontrollable. But then there is something that I tried from last 1 year, which has helped me reach, I mean, closer to that achieving psychological freedom. So before that, I had a lot of emotional issues, something, or maybe if somebody is not treating me well, I used to be very angry or sad or upset about those things. But then I saw this video about Hinduism, and there was this concept, there is a saying that says that do your duty and don't think about the result. Right. So how I will relate it here, I mean, again, it might sound weird, but so when I do anything or something that upsets me, then I think about my actions. So I will, okay, I'll think if I have actually done my duty properly as a son, as a friend, as an employee to an employer, or maybe as in a social gathering, is my duty justified? If that is something that is missing from my side, I'll be like, okay, this is something I have to build upon. But if I have done it right, then I don't worry about it. I move on. Okay. So it's, I mean, I would, something that I want to convey here is like, you just have to do your actions and you don't have to, that should be right. In your understanding, in your mind, you should be the one that the person who's doing the actions right. I mean, you should feel content at the end of the day that whatever I did was in the right spirit, was for the benefit of everything, for myself also. But then there comes a point where you say, okay, that way I think you are not being ambitious about yourself, right? About your future or things like that. But then there comes an action for or a duty towards yourself also.
Yes.
So you have an ambition. There is a duty to keep yourself happy, or rather than choosing the word happy, I would say content or satisfied in life. Content with what you have. And if you are content that way with your actions, with everything that you have done, and you don't feel bad about something because you, in your mind, you think that I have done the right thing, I mean, that will be okay with, I mean, you won't feel, or you won't have too much of extreme emotions in either positive side or even in the negative side. So yeah, that's something that actually helps me in achieving or maybe moving closer
But Piyush, Jameen, just a question. So I mean, you mentioned a great point, Piyush. But when you say that, I do my duty as a son or as a employee, etc., are you not again drawing up a framework which is limiting your psychological freedom to be to a point where, okay, I've done my duty, now I'm psychologically free, and if I've not done, I'm bound by it, right? I mean, I'm talking about even difference in ideology, and we would have seen in terms of, let's say, the father wants his son to become or a daughter to become something, whatever, XYZ, or become an IAS officer or a doctor or whatever. And let's say the son has got a different ideology or wants to pursue something completely different. So where is a question of a psychological freedom, where in this case the son will end up, or the kid will end up doing what the parent wants, right? So, I mean, we should not go down a rabbit hole of saying that, okay, I've done my duty, now, I'm psychologically free kind of stuff. That's my thought. I mean,
no, so yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it's again a perception thing, but what I believe, I have a role defined, a role kind of. So when you say a father, son, or a parent child relation, then my duties are to be there for my parents when they need me, and to maybe obey their thing, to obey their decisions for me, what they think are right. But at a certain stage, if I think that I'm doing a right thing for myself, and if they are wrong, I'll try to explain it to them, but I'll go my way. But then at the end of the day, I'm not regretting about my decision. That's where I'm
no,
psychologically.
that's different. But is it not curtailing? So if you look at Gopal Gaur Das, who's a monk, right? He said, "I disappointed my parents by choosing to become a monk," right? So there, he was actually letting go of a psychological baggage in the form of expectations from the parents to become somebody like every normal child would end up to become, right? Somebody who will land himself in a good job, get married to the girl of the choice of the parents, etc., grow his family and all of that, right? So I'm saying that is something which certainly will be, and I'll just allow Jameen or others to also reflect upon it. Because if I say I'm doing my duty as a son, or looking at fulfilling all my responsibility, that is not psychological freedom. And I think in a way that is something which is going to limit you, right? Either we say, and it's not just about living in the present moment, because then we can talk about corporate executives living in the present moment and far a lot happier, right? I think psychological freedom is, I mean, something similar to a monk, where you're not carrying any responsibilities, any baggages, anything that you need to answer to, right? Nothing, right? You can do what you want. You're living the moment, like Jamin said. You're living in this moment, right?
Yeah, I mean, just because you brought up my name, I want to say, and this is one big lesson I have learned over last 4-5 years. So it's very recent learning. There is a huge difference between living in the moment and doing whatever we want. This is one of the biggest misunderstood concept, yeah, of living in the moment and doing whatever we want. In fact, there has been this, I would not want to classify it in generation, but okay, there is this huge group of people I've always met where they do whatever they want under the hood of saying, oh, we are living in the moment. It's not. Yeah, that it's absolutely not. And monks, for example, I don't think any corporate head can or would be carrying amount of responsibility that a monk would carry. Yeah, I think the monks would carry and do carry the biggest responsibilities compared to any of the biggest corporates had, in my perspective. But doctor, you had raised your hand. You wanted to say something. Sorry.
Yeah, what I want to say is, with respect to what Piyush was saying, I don't think he was making a broad statement saying that, I will just do what I want and not be very this thing about the parents' expectations and stuff. I think that first of all, I don't think we can generalize psychological freedom. I think it differs from person to person, because our upbringings, our cultures, our social, this thing is very different from each other. And second thing is that if I had to generalize it, there is this concept called adult ego state and child ego state and parent ego state. I'm not sure if you guys know that. Yeah. So in that state, I would say, if I had to generalize psychological freedom, I would say at every given moment, bringing yourself and making a decision from the adult ego state, where you say that, hey, whatever that person said or whatever my parents said, I'm angry about it. I feel the anger. And from this awareness of feeling the anger, I choose to show the anger. I choose to yell at this individual, or I choose to not. So in that moment, I'm giving myself the freedom to, number one, feel the emotion, and number two, act upon the emotion from a very aware state. I think, to me, that would be psychological freedom, where I am allowing myself to feel the emotions, plus being able to make a decision where I'm okay with the action that's going to follow. There is no regret after it, because it comes from a point of awareness.
Yes.
Yes, I'm going to beat up this individual, but I've thought about it.
Yes.
And I've given myself the choice not to beat him up, and I still choose to beat him up, so I'm okay with that.
Yes. I mean, what doctors, just for the group to know, if not I just said yes. Yeah. I mean, these states are generally a therapy practice called transactional analysis therapy practice, where these different 3 states come into play. Yeah. So maybe we look it up, or we will cover in one of these sessions alongside CBT kind of approach. We can cover the transactional analysis approach. But yes, Pilar. But just to summarize again, so what she said, at least one of the common aspect of psychological freedom could be, and we need to agree it as a group to proceed from here, otherwise I don't go to the next point. One of the common aspects, at least what we are trying to say, is psychological freedom is between stimulus and response. I have an awareness, and then based on from that awareness, whatever the response would be, whether it's right, wrong, whatever predefined, that's a different story. But as long as I have that awareness in between the stimulate and response, it's not an autopilot mode, that's a psychological freedom. Yeah. So as long as if we agree to, or if all of us agree that the definition could be much bigger, the umbrella could be much bigger, but if this is one of the cornerstones that we agree to, we can proceed. But yes, Pilar.
Thank you. Besides the awareness, what I want to say, apagan the robot. Every time I start speaking, he comes and makes noise. If I'm quiet, it doesn't happen. Why? Okay. So besides the psychological freedom, there is something I want to add to the awareness, that it has to do with the self-perception of where you're standing. For instance, many of the things I didn't have psychological freedom in many times of my life was because I was feeling in danger.
Yes.
Whenever
Yes.
I was feeling in safety, I would do a lot of things. But if I was perceiving some kind of danger
Yes.
that would bring me fear, that would bring me guilt, that there would be a consequence,
Yes.
that I could do something that was irreparable or unforgivable,
Yes.
or cause pain to
Yes.
somebody else.
Yes.
That, and many times you have this, but the other person doesn't even notice, just looks at you and says, "Ah, she has such a horrible mood," and
Yes.
they don't give a second to all
Yes.
the conflict that you have in your back,
Yes.
and the danger, the fear, the guilt, the consequence, the things you try to avoid because there is no safety, no
Yes.
perception of self-safety.
Yes.
So the awareness has to do with the self-safety, because if I feel that my father is going to have a heart attack if I get out of the closet, I won't,
Yes.
or I'll keep a double life or something, because I don't perceive myself or the situation with the other person as safe.
Yeah.
So part of creating this safety in the mind through the awareness, it can give like a filter, so we can learn to put things in perspective, proportion, and space.
Yes.
And that was all I wanted to say.
Yes, thank you. And again, Pilar, what Pilar touched upon is, and KL, now maybe you get a little more. So it's not about really a very pragmatic, practical viewpoint of the Maslow's triangle. I mean, you might not feel safety because of n number of reasons. And unless you have that safety within you, you do not have, I would say, correct me, Pilar, if I'm going wrong over here. What Pilar is trying to say is, if that safety isn't there, the awareness needed for psychological freedom won't be there. So the when you are at risk, when you do not have a safety, and whatever that safety could mean for a person, yeah, and that's Maslow's, you cannot have the security, the freedom, the space to go and to be aware and use that awareness as a psychological freedom. Yeah. Alessandra, Piyush, anybody, anything else that we want in terms of defining at least the premise of the psychological freedom before we go to my next question to trigger further? Yeah.
So yeah, just one last, closing
Yes.
note on that topic.
Yes.
So
Yes.
what I was trying to convey, like if I could put it in one line, was that what makes me achieve that psychological freedom is that the result is not in my hand. The one thing that is in my hand are my actions, and if in my head they are right, then it's okay. I cannot worry about the result because I am not sure what it will be, right?
Yes.
So
Yes. Yeah.
yeah,
But this
that
awareness and this concept of you to
yes,
try and work is today there because there is, maybe, I'm not sure, there is a newfound foundation of safety within yourself. Yeah, you are not really now fighting against bringing safety back to yourself, and maybe that's why you can think and apply this. But think about the times when you were not safe.
you need a conscious effort there.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's there.
Yes. Yes.
At first you need a conscious effort, and then it will become your habit.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Then this.
And one,
Yes, Alessandra.
sorry. Just another important, I think that the doctor said something very important with all the, first of all, becoming aware, And an essential part of it that we need to become aware for psychological freedom is that we are the things that we control. I can't control what other people say or do or whatever, but I can control my mind and my actions. And I think that that is essential for psychological freedom. Having that awareness that you are the one that's in control of your life and of your thoughts and of your actions, not somebody else, and taking that control.
Yes, yes, yes. That's a very beautiful point, and I would want to hook on it because we are almost 1 hour. So guys, let me know if you want to, if you're done, if you think it's tiring, we want to close the call, we can close the call or we continue. So let me know, because I'm just getting warmed up. So now this point, I think we have discussed this point n number of times. We have heard this point n number of times. Yeah, what we are in control of is ourselves. What we are in control of is our mind. Are we? How can I control my mind? Can I control my internal state? Because if I can, then I am psychologically free from that cornerstone of between stimulus and response. I'll always be aware. But am I? Yeah, we need to ask this question to ourselves. Are we free? Are we in control of our internal mind so that we always are aware between stimulus and response? I mean, after I shouted at my daughter for a very lame thing for half an hour and then I got aware, oh, I'm shouting. That's not awareness. I mean, that's still a better thing than not realizing it at all. Yeah. But did I choose? Or could I see myself? Was I aware of taking a decision of being getting angry or being annoyed or anything? Is this, what's the formula to do this?
I think you either go to the Himalayas
I think,
or you be aware at every single moment. I don't think, like, I've been trying to get, I've been trying to, I'm in therapy for the past 1 year, trying to get control over my emotions, especially my anger. And even after being in therapy for 1 year, I can say that I feel anger.
Yes.
There is no way that I'm not.
Yes.
The only thing, the difference between 1 year ago and now is that I'm aware that I have anger. I feel the anger.
Yes.
I acknowledge the anger.
Yes.
And then I make a choice.
Yes.
Whether I walk away from the situation,
yes.
whether I confront the person,
yes.
or like I said before, I punch the guy. Yes. Whatever it is, I make a choice.
You're aware of it. Yes, you have a choice. You're aware of the choice. That choice is still predominantly a little bit autopilot, but you are at least able.
It comes. The initial reaction till date is autopilot. The initial feeling is still till date.
Yes.
I don't think that can go.
Yes.
But as soon as it comes, the next moment should be awareness, and the next moment after that is a decision.
Yeah. And the beautiful part about this sentence, what you said is, there is always an initial to initial. Yeah, the initial might be actually 100 steps down the line. Yeah, and we are, and the next moment is actually half an hour late. Yeah, I mean that's the whole point. And here, for example, Piyush, what you were trying to say, sorry for using the Hindi phrase, ke karma karo, phal ki ichha na karo. It wouldn't help. It doesn't give you psychological freedom. Wouldn't you be getting angry? Yeah, it gives you a little more peace on your actions and expectations. So it's about controlling the expectation from the deeds that you do. But is that psychological freedom? Yeah. Do you have that gap between stimulus and response? The awareness.
It's the awareness. I mean, like, if something like this happens to me, like last week only, I got this mail, which got me really angry. And I won't say I have psychological freedom. So I got really angry. I read that email and I was like, okay, what the hell is wrong with the email?
Yeah.
And I kind of shouted at that person in my head, okay, for a couple of minutes. But then the time frame, it actually is the important thing. So it was only for a couple of minutes. And then before taking any decision, before replying to that email, I thought myself, okay, what should be my action here? And if it is a justified or a right action in that way, and like I actually acted pretty well on it, I would say.
Yes.
And then after 5 minutes, I was all okay. I was like, okay, I sorted it out. I didn't take any irrational step or any irrational measure, and I was okay. Yeah.
Yes.
But I won't
You
say I've
should
achieved
define that
complete.
as psychological freedom for you at that moment. At that moment, I would define that as psychology. You made a choice, a conscious choice, but wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. Although, like I said, you felt the anger, and I don't think we can stop that. I don't think we can stop feeling anger, stop feeling jealousy, stop feeling anything for that matter.
Yes.
I don't think that's a feasible thing to even expect of human beings. But once we feel that and we are aware of it, and then what happens in the next moment is what we can control.
That is a freedom. Okay, I agree, and it's kudos to you. It's already a huge step. Many of us can't do it, so kudos to you. But for me, that's a freedom in action. For me, it would be a psychological freedom if you would say that anger, when that anger came and you were punching or shouting at that guy in your mind, it didn't affect you. Let that play as a background picture, but it didn't affect you. It didn't raise your heartbeat. It did not make you. That, for me, is pure psychological freedom, where psychologically you are not affected by it. Let it come, but you are not affected by it. For me, that is the premise of psychological freedom. Yeah, that's the psychological freedom. And then the actions for me, and again, just as a person, for me, the outcomes, I weigh them very less, because I see them as the last 2% of the entire movement of psychology. Yeah, the 98% is what is inside the head. That 2% is significantly important because we are a social being, so it impacts a lot socially. But for me as a person, my psychology, yeah, if you see the entire movement, the 98% effect was internal to me, and that still happened. It still harmed me. If you would have sent that email, imagine you would have sent that email in a bigger context of thing, what would have happened? It would have, that's only the 2% of the entire movement, isn't it? The 98% movement was you getting affected by it internally, doing that argument, doing that screenplay. Of course, you stopped it at a certain point in time. You controlled it. You took a choice at certain point in time, which is excellent. You didn't allow it to grow beyond that, which was excellent. But if you look only at that entire storyline, if you would have sent that mail, it would have its repercussion. That's the last 2% or 5%, maybe. 98% it affected me internally.
Okay, so one thing I would like to say over here is, I mean, I just started practicing it for a year, but what I have definitely achieved, what I see is, if that would have happened a year or 2 years back, I would have been angry or upset about the whole event for an entire day, maybe, or half a day.
Yeah.
And then yesterday or like last week when it happened, it was like 10 minutes and I was all okay. I was like, okay, I've done what I could have done, and the outcome is again not in my hand, and that's the best thing. So I feel I'm reaching there, but I'm not. Obviously, it is a long journey, so it will take time. I'm not there yet, but maybe by this approach, someday I'll reach there.
I second what Piyush said. The reason is that the more I'm aware of my feelings, and the more I act in the adult ego state, aware of the feeling, and then I choose my action, I think there's a feedback mechanism which says that you don't have to get this angry about these things. I think it has happened in the last 1 year, because I can tell you, from if I was angry with my mom, I have a very, very tumultuous relationship with my mom. So if there was a trigger that she started, and I would go berserk, like I would literally hold my hair like this and like pull my hair out and stuff, and like, oh my God, leave me alone, sort of a thing. I've had those kind of arguments with my mom. But today, the very same words, like I think Alessandra said, or Pilar said, that you cannot change anybody else, you have to change yourself, right? So once that happened, now the same triggers, she hasn't changed. The same triggers do not make me that angry.
Yes,
I can walk away from that. So I think what you're saying, Jemin, is that it starts from being aware of the emotions, starts from making conscious choices after being aware of the emotions. And as we tend to do that, there'll come a period of time when the emotions itself are kind of in your control.
Will there come a time? The question really is, and I think we jumped the gun because, and let's see how it goes. So, but just the construct here, or the inquiry that I'm trying to do is, do we think this, how do I frame it? A relativity, is there a relativity in psychological freedom? Can we say I am now 5% relatively free? or that's just a facade of telling I'm not free. Do you really, it's said, and we all agree and we want to believe the hope is one of the strongest emotion and we should never lose it. But my real question is there a becoming in a psychological freedom? Do you think this movement of me trying to observe me, etc., and I trying to do something, I not liking one state, I liking another state, I'm happy now, 1 year, and I'm much more in control, I can see this in action, I can't. Do you think this can actually, and it's an inquiry, it's not a rhetorical question, it's an inquiry, do you think this step-by-step achievement of freedom can fill the jar of freedom and say, oh, now I'm at 80%, now I'm at 90%, now I'm at 100%? Or do you think, no, this is just another facade of fooling myself, ego, satisfying the ego that I'm doing something, and just reinforcing the non-freedom in a more acceptable way so that we can cope up with the non-freedom? You know where I'm coming from? Maybe.
Jameen, and just to add, I just want to ask an honest question with everybody on the call today. How much of time do every event thrown at you goes in that methodical step of you have a stimulus, you have an awareness, and then it results in an action, okay, or a response from your side, right? There are certainly events which give some sort of a time, right, in terms of, okay, here's something, and now I've got 2 hours to be aware. But many a time in terms of anger management related issues, or like Doc was talking about the issues sometimes of fight she has with her mom, right? It's all happening within a matter of few seconds. It could be 10 seconds, 5 seconds. Just think about a road rage, right? Somebody comes and thrashes you or hits you, pulls you out of the car, right? Are you going to be sitting there aware, okay, this is the stimulus, he was right, I was right, or I was wrong, he was wrong, whatever, right? And then, respond, right? So my question is, while it's good to be in that state of mind, or to your point on, relatively, are you 5% or 10% and actually making progress to fill the jar, I'm trying to question the sequence at which life throws these things, and how much of every event has that opportunity to go in that step-by-step approach, right?
I'm even challenging if the step-by-step approach works to start with. Yeah,
it doesn't. That's what I'm saying. If the whole episode is, let's say, within 5 seconds, right? I mean, just think about it. I mean, wrong example, but you're in a plane and it's been hijacked, right? Do you have that opportunity to say, okay, this guy is wielding a gun, and wrong example, but I'm sorry, but it doesn't happen in that step to step. There are things where you can apply all of this, like the cockroach example with Sundar Pichai talked about. Fantastic. He could be talking this because this is 100th time that example is being quoted, right?
No, I mean, plane getting hijacked and somebody actually pragmatically looking at it, maybe there are people who do that, yeah. So, but are they psychologically free? And that's my question. And is there a step-by-step approach to getting free?
No, absolutely. So my question also is, can this actually be prescribed like in a follow a step-by-step approach? Step 1 is look at the stimulus. Step 2, are you aware? Step 3, this should be a response. It doesn't happen in life, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
I would like to ask.
I can only speak from my experience for the past 1 year. I believe that it is like learning to ride a bicycle. There'll be a lot of, believe me, there'll be a lot of setbacks, a lot of going back to square one and all that stuff that happen. But the more I practiced it, I realized that I can apply it to all aspects of my life now. Like when I get irritated with my son, he's 13-year-old, he's a budding teenager. Believe me, he tests my patience. Or when I'm doing with any of the employees that are working under me, or if it's anything of that sort, I feel that it's possible. The step-by-step approach, number 1, is just baby steps. It's just a point to begin, is what I believe. Second thing, where I'm considering what Jemin was talking about. Jemin, it's like since I have no idea what psychological freedom, 100% psychological freedom even looks like, or even I don't even have the enough imaginative capacity to imagine myself to have 100% psychological independence, psychological freedom, the only thing I can start from is compare myself to where I was before to where I am right now. That's the only thing I can do, because these two are what do you say, concrete. There is something that I can go back to. What I could have been or where I can be, I don't think I will be able to even talk about it, because I believe the psychological freedom is subjective from person to person.
Yes.
Sorry?
Yeah, no, yes, I just said yes.
Yeah, subjective from person to person, and so hence I can only talk about myself. I can only compare myself from point A to point B, and point A to point B, this is what happens. I'll come back in another year and say, okay, this is my point C and this is what has happened. It's completely failed, or maybe it's gone a little further.
Yeah.
That's what I can.
From your point A to point B, doctor, if I can, sorry, Piyush, you want to go ahead? You had a question.
It's okay, you can continue.
Okay. So let's try and take the concrete example. Let's not go into imaginative state. So let's go to your concrete example of point A to point B. Between your point A and point B, what is the main difference? What is the root cause? If you were to, your today's point B had to tell your point A, what was the biggest cause of not having the freedom? What would you tell your point A today?
Biggest cause of not having the freedom? That's a good question. I would say societal expectations. I would say
yes.
Behavioral preconditioning.
Yes. And what's the common? Yeah, what is the common thing between them? So a person who experiences society expectation, who has a behavioral precondition, a set stereotype, or stress because of that stress stereotype to abide to. What does all three of them entail into? Yeah, because this is three things. This could be other 5 things for me, for example. Yeah, but
right.
If you put this into a juicer and take it out, what does it comply to? What does it imply? How does one get a society pressure? Why does one feel the pressure of society? For example, from your example,
yeah, from my example, I don't think, like I said, I don't think I had any other choice. I don't think I was aware enough when I was a young child or a teenager or something, when I started rebelling against my mom because of what happened when I was much younger and the way she used me as an emotional crutch. The only way I knew how to come out of it is to go in the opposite direction, become a rebel child, right? So when that pattern was set in, that the only way I can deal with my mom is to be a rebel child, that pattern continued on till my 40s. Or till my late 30s. Right? I'm just 40. So till today, for 4 decades, 3 decades, I should say, that's been my go-to response to anything that comes up as a conflict between me and my mom. Because I knew nothing else to do. I knew I didn't have any idea that it could be dealt in a different way.
Yeah.
Now, when I went into therapy and I was given a choice, or I was not given a choice, I was made aware that I had a choice about the way I deal with those conflicts. A very simple sentence that my therapist said was, she's throwing down a bait. You know, the trigger words or her expressions or her rolling of the eyes or whatever it is, that's a trigger. It's a bait. She's throwing it down. You don't have to pick it up.
Yeah.
And that was a mind-blowing aha moment for me.
Definitely. Yeah, it's powerful. Yeah. Very powerful.
You know, so when that happened, from then onwards, I realized that I have a choice in everything else too. I mean, of course, like I said, it took a good 6 months to even come to a point of this understanding between myself and my own consciousness and everything. But like I said, I told KL, it was like riding a bike. But once that happened, now even like KL said, if somebody comes and hits my car and completely his fault or her fault and not mine, I still will be able to not fly into a rage and go hack that guy to death. Because believe me, I'll do it in my head, but I will not do it to him. That is my that is the,
So
like I said, I cannot escape from the emotions, but
yeah.
what I can do is what I do after that.
Yeah. So in the center, if I may still, if we can inquire together, yeah. And I'm sorry, I'm just picking up your example, but it comes down as I hope it comes down as a common thing for everybody. At the center of that hurricane, at the center of these, well, I'm trying to avoid a word, but okay, in the center of this hurricane, is there a feeling of my isolated self, my identity versus rest of the identity? It could be mother, it could be society, it could be anything. But it's my isolated, shrinked space, the center, okay, let's call it the me, the I-ness, yeah, where that I is playing such a central role in that hurricane that it's I versus rest of the things. Yeah, can that be the root cause of this entire storm? If you now think back.
Absolutely. If, like I said, if you remember, I told you about the 3 ego states, right?
Yes.
What I recognized is that my reaction to my mom at every given time of any given spot of time used to come from the child ego state.
Yes.
The minute she started those triggers, I would immediately mentally go back to that 10, 12, 13-year-old girl. And what the 10, 12, 13, 14-year-old girl did was to rebel. And that's exactly what I did. Although I was 35 years old as of now,
yes,
at that moment of time, right?
Mm.
So it came from the child ego state. But when I went into therapy and I realized that there is an adult ego state where it's okay to feel that. But after you feel that, whatever feelings that you're feeling, you can actually take a step back mentally. You can come to the adult ego state from the child ego state and take a decision from the adult ego state how you're going to react to this.
Mm.
Once I realized that trick, or not realized, once I learned that trick, I should say,
yeah.
I think it has been, I think it has been, it's an automatic reversal to child ego state.
Yes.
Before that.
Yes.
I immediately became that 13-year-old or 14-year-old rebellious teenager who, beyond anything else, I should fight with my mom and I should rebel against her and disrespect her and whatever.
So there's different ego states. Yeah. You going from child ego state to a parent ego state. And I later I'll ask the question, does parent ego state itself have problems or not? Yeah. But you going from one ego state to another ego state. Who is going? Whose state was it? And who's going?
It's me, my consciousness.
Is it fair to simplify it and call it's your own ego?
Absolutely. It's called an ego state.
But who is observing that ego state and taking it to the next ego state? Again, the ego itself?
The adult ego state, I guess.
Ego.
There is one ego state that is known as the adult ego state, which is aware of everything that is going on in the head and is able to take a bird's eye view, is what I have learned. That is known as the adult ego state. The adult ego state understands that you are in the child ego state, understands that you're yelling and screaming because of a history that's happened before, right?
Yes.
And then it understands that, hey, you know what, you can come to me or you can come to my state, my adult ego state, recognize that and just say, Ma, we both are adults, let's talk it out.
Yes.
Let's not yell at each other. That's what I have been taught is the adult ego state is this ego state that's having the point. It's me only, but it's having a bird's eye point of view.
Yes.
Of what my other two states are doing.
Yes.
And absolutely, parent ego state is a highly contaminated ego state.
Yes.
Parent ego state comes when I tell my son, because I said so.
Yes.
That is a direct repetition of what my mom used to tell me, because I said so.
Yes.
So it comes from there. So that's the parent ego state. I'm just emulating my parents.
Yes. So while your one ego state, from one ego state, you could, while going from one ego state to another ego state, you could overcome, say, anger issues, but ego in itself. So previously the child ego state, aka neutrally ego, was giving you aggression and making you rebellious. There is parent ego state, aka ego, helping you overcome that, but now you have some other issues with that ego state. The crux that I'm trying to come to is, isn't this psychological non-freedom in that root of entire hurricane, isn't it the ego in itself allowing us to not have psychological freedom? Isn't the ego itself a hurdle to the non-freedom of psychology? Yeah, and it just manifests in a very different, all the ways. I getting angry, I feeling this right, I feeling this wrong. Maybe in Piyush example, I'm not there yet, so I cannot comment, but maybe in Piyush, your example, I doing deeds without expecting fruits from it because I want to be free. I want to be free, right? Again, ego telling, so there are different states of egos trying to cope up and make life bearable from each other. But, and as rightly pointed out by Doctor, these are different states of the same ego, isn't it? Can we see this, or is this going a little too much out of scope now for discussion? You know,